Hi everyone, Dr. Jimmy here. So today is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Grindle. We're going to talk about how she practically paid off $340,000 of student loans in just 22 months. If you haven't watched the previous video, check that out. Stay tuned and let's talk about it. What did you start doing?
Yeah, so really through residency, I kind of had my head in the sand a little bit, and I think this is where I would have done things very differently. So through residency, you're right. You feel like you've arrived and you have a job, and the student loans are just the expectation. And so for 3 years, we kind of just hit our. I say we because I got married in the middle, but we just kind of hit our heads in the sand and didn't think about it. In my residency, which was 3 years, that 215,000 grew to almost 300,000. And so for me, that is a huge learning step when you're thinking about financing school, because there that alone, that interest alone, is an insurmountable number for most people, let alone the actual debt itself. And so thinking about going back and doing it over again, I wish I would have known that. And so that was something that I reflected on and thought I really need others thinking about that to know about this process of, yes, the money is there, you take it, it's an investment, but then don't forget about it, because 3 years amounted to about $75,000 of it.
And exactly, most people take about roughly 15 to 20 years to pay off their student loans. And if you think about it, like you said, within 3 years, you had really it had accrued almost close to $7,000 in interest. So can you imagine, 30 years of student loan? So in a nutshell, you can potentially pay, I would say, what, 2 to 3 times what you actually took if you follow the traditional method.
Correct. Yeah. The traditional method is all about getting to the end of a pay period. They don't necessarily want you to pay off the amount that you owed them. They actually just want you to pay the interest on those.
Interest. So then the interest can continue to accrue and accrue and accrue without actually touching the principal.
Correct. And so by the time you get to the deadline, then all of a sudden you're ended up with a real stress, because you got to the deadline, you've paid what you were supposed to, but the amount that you owe them is still the same. And so then
That's a very good point. And a lot of us, when we finance, we finance a lot of stuff. Most people finance their cars, their home, almost everything around us we finance, and we just focus on how much can I pay every month, without really focusing on how much did that particular thing cost me, and how much am I actually bringing down my principal. Most of us don't think like that way because we just want to live comfortably, pay the interest that they've told us, right? Somebody will get a $10,000 loan and tell them you can only pay $25 a month, and that's all they want to hear, not knowing that $10,000 is going to grow into $50,000 pretty soon. So, for our viewers, please be mindful of those things. Pay attention to the original cost of your items or your projects or your investments, and actually focus on hitting that main principle. Go ahead, Dr. Grindle.
right. And so for 3 years, I was head in the sand. I'm just going to not think about it. And then you graduate from residency and you're expected to be a real adult at that point. And so here my poor husband is trying to be an adult and looking at all of my bills, and he's going, wait, how did 215,000 300,000, and we didn't even realize it was 300,000. And he had a disaster of a time. Um, he was like, I never signed up for all of this debt. Like, what are we going to do about it? And so, bless his heart, he was the one who was frantically online trying to figure out how we're supposed to in with like $300,000 worth of debt. And he came across program that's run by Ramsey. And Dave Ramsey is a religious-based system, which I understand is not for everyone. But his principles are that when you are in debt, you are enslaved to the person that you owe money. And everything kind of stems from that idea of, when I owe you money, I owe you something and therefore I'm not free. And for my husband, that was so important. He kept saying to me, like, yeah, you're going to make a lot of money. Yeah. But we're still slave to these people that we owe money. And so basically started an intensive budgeting system where the goal was to pay off these debts. And for me, I was so resistant to it first because I had common student loans. Everybody around me had student loans. This was the expectation for decades after you graduate medical school. It was always something that doctors deal with, and it was like, oh, you're so therefore you have student loans. Like that was just my normal, but it was not my husband's normal. So reluctantly, he drove to this that said, how do we get rid of these astronomical numbers? So what he did was he went into all of the accounts, and student loans, for those that don't know, are labeled by groups. When you take them, there's different forms of loans that have different interests and owe to different people, even though one check. And so I had loans A through J. And those were all separate loans that all totaled this $300,000. Some of them smaller, some of them, I think the largest one was like 5,000 or something. But all of them together was the total of that, about 300,000.
Wow.
And so what we did was we were meticulous, and we budgeted and said, how do we live on what we made in residency, and then prioritize the rest of the income as extra to pay for all of these debts.
All right. So so basically, I remember actually us talking about this in the past, and we had those CDs.
Yeah. Was the spark, and then the $300,000 Kevin was like, I gotta figure this out.
That's hilarious. But yeah, so that's good. So budgeting was number one, right? So you started budgeting, and it was very aggressive, I'm assuming, right? And Dave Ramsey's principle there is obviously, like you just stated, really kind of get rid. And I think, if I recall right, his principle really, because majority of people, their primary thing is a house. And so he really focuses a lot on getting rid of that house. But for us, really, our primary investment is our education. So you can take the same principle there and obviously apply it to our houses as well. So great. So what happened? How long did it take you and Kevin? And how long did it take you guys to kind of get rid of this?
Yeah, so we started with my signing bonus for pending physician job. So I started in like July, August of 2018. And Dave Ramsey's approach actually prioritizes consumer debt, which cars,
credit cards,
student loans there. And then that's called baby step 2. And by the time you get to paying off the house, that's the line. That's like step 5. It calls it. So for us, baby step 2 was all of the student loans, the cars that we had purchased, the credit cards that we had, and we labeled those debts, smallest debt, largest debts, and decided what the minimum payment was on them, and then budgeted out. So whatever extra in our budget went 100% to the smallest debt.
Okay.
And basically what that did was that created what's called the snowball effect. The minimum payments on the smaller debt, when you pay them off, get snowballed or added together into the minimum payments of the next smallest. And so when we paid off loan number 1, the minimum payment of $65 then automatically went into loan number 2,
Okay.
to that minimum payment.
Okay, which is very smart. So basically, you group the debt, and you paid actually. So did you do it by the amount or by the interest?
By the amount.
Okay.
The reason we did by the amount is because the interest rate does not make the minimum payment change.
Okay.
The amount that you owe is directly related to the minimum payment on that debt.
Okay.
So if the minimum payment is smaller, then the idea that debt off first, because then
Okay.
that all added to the next.
The next one, so you can just keep going and going. Great, that's amazing. So
Yeah.
this was around, you said around August, September 2019,
18.
and you started up knocking stuff off. You most likely got rid of all the consumer debt, obviously credit cards, in some cases, the vehicles. Because I quite remember you made that switch from the vehicle. I remember that. And you start focusing on the student loan. So with that loan from 2019 up until when did you get rid of them?
Yeah, so actually I'm a year ahead of you. So 2018 is
2018, that's right. Yeah.
And it took us 24 months to pay off the entirety of the student loans and all of the consumer debt that we had. So it totaled about $140,000 in.
How much? I missed that one.
$340,000 in
Okay. 24 months. That's amazing. So $324,000. Yes.
$340,000
Okay. $340,000 in 24 months. 22 months.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
$340,000 in 22 months.
Yes. And
fantastic.
Or a plan was not nearly that fast. And so when I first started and Kevin was so excited about this, I was thinking this was going to take us 5 years. I mean, it usually takes people 30 years, right? If you just stick to the regular. I was thinking, okay, it's going to be 5 years and it's going to be a horrible 5 years. We're not going to be able to do it. We're never going to be able to go anywhere. It took 22 months. And so I feel like that's the most important thing that I learned from here. The expectations are so skewed when it comes to how easy and hard and what's the expectation about paying these student loans off. Even with the new perspective, we were thinking 5 years and I wasn't able to handle that. And really, I was totally against it. And then all of a sudden, it took us time that we were planning on it. All of a sudden, we're looking back, going, "Oh my gosh, I just paid $340,000 in 22 months. How is that even possible?" And honestly, we're not 100% sure why it happened like that. Literally, all we did was lined up the debts, decided which one's the smallest and which one was the largest, and that fixed amount that we paid was there every time. It just either was split between the 13 that we owed, or if we only owed one, all of that from all 13 was put into the one, and it was so much faster than we could ever imagine.
I mean, in hindsight, it looks like you said, very fast, and you guys have done an amazing job, but it was certainly very uncomfortable in the process. I mean, I'm assuming, or you can share with us, by that time, these are some of the basic financial principles out there. Did you have your emergency fund saved up?
Yeah, so Dave Ramsey's version of emergency fund and my version of emergency fund was very different.
Okay.
Dave Ramsey, when you are getting out of debt, his recommendation is that you have $1,000 to your name.
Well, that's very relative.
Which is, I was so uncomfortable with. So I would say, though, that the reason that this happened as fast as it did is when I became comfortable with only having $1,000 to my name. So I was a hoarder. I was a saver. I wanted that bank account that had the $10,000, $11,000 sitting there. And as soon as I was comfortable in the process where every month we budgeted and there was extra that then we put towards the loans. So therefore, we never touched that $10,000, $11,000 that just sat in the bank. As soon as I was comfortable with that process, that was the catalyst that made this go faster. Because about 3 or 4 loans in, I was like, why are we sitting on this $10,000? This $10,000 could pay off the truck, and the truck money could give. And I feel like that was like me letting go 100% and saying, I just need to do this plan.
And it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable because my wife would tell me the same thing. It's very uncomfortable because emergencies happen, right? And the idea down there, the concept in the financial world is basically you save about 6 to 12 months, or in some cases 3 months of your monthly expenses, right? But in this case, you were basically growing really like with nothing because your monthly the $1,000 is certainly not going to fix your monthly expenses. But then the focus really was the debt. So for our viewers, this was a brilliant plan. It has worked for you. It's not a bad idea to go that route. It's not a bad idea to keep maybe a month or 2 or 3 to 6 months. My wife and I actually did. We have about 6 months there, and pursuing the same process. So it's a tough one, but the beauty of it is in 22 months, right? In 22 months, you got rid of $340,000. Now you are financially free, and if I may add on to that, you also paid off your home and basically doing crazy renovations. So you're in a very good financial space, all within a period of about 5 years, if I were to say, because you graduated in 2018.
Yes, yes, yes. And so
Well,
that
go ahead.
just confidence alone to pay off the student loans and that first 340,000, you're supposed to on the Dave Ramsey plan then kind of like back up and like take a little time and like go on vacation and all these things. But we're like, oh my gosh, we did this in 22 months. Are you kidding me? We have no children yet. We got time. Like, let's pay off the house. We paid off our house. We owed $226,000 on our house. We paid that off in like 17 months after that first. And then all of a sudden you have nothing to owe anyone. Cars are paid for, our loans are done, our house is paid off, and now you're like, okay, if I decided that I didn't want to go to work today, it's okay. Because I think the other thing about being a physician, that once you decide to go through school, then people feel stuck after that. I train physicians for a living now, and I have residents who look me straight in the face and say, I don't like medicine, but I have student loans. And so therefore I am a doctor. And when you get to like that sense of slavery really in life where you are stuck to do one thing because of something that you owe someone, I'm like, man, like really life can be so different. So the financial freedom, being able to say, I love my job and that's why I'm going to go to my job versus I'm going to my job to make money so I can pay back what I already owe, is a real big
which
difference.
is where a lot of people are. But the take-home message I want our viewers to understand is that as the saying goes, it takes money to make money. So if you've embarked on any investment for yourself through education, it is important that you pay back so you can be free. Can you imagine paying this amount of money off within such a short period of time with some sort of um, menial job? That's impossible.
Yeah,
So, yes,
tried it and I failed. It took me
yep,
15 months and I got $30,000, and $30,000 was not enough.
exactly. So that's what I want our viewers to keep in mind. Be very, very mindful of the career you pick. Think not just because of the money, rather think of how you're going to help other people. But you have to be wise enough to pick one that would be beneficial financially as well, that will help you pay off your debt and really enjoy the very thing that you want to do. So keep those things in mind. Well, with everything that you've been able to achieve, you and Kevin, over a span of roughly 5 years, what would be your message to, somebody in undergrad, somebody in medical school who has this surmountable amount of debt, and they're just drowned or feeling overwhelmed and don't know what they're going to do. They can afford to not pass, all that stuff. What would you say to them?
I would say as soon as you can make financial decisions or career decisions where you can have an income that is plenty, that's when you take this chance and you go out into the job market. So again, I train physicians for a living. I'm a core at a residency program. A lot of residents after residency go, I don't know enough. And so I'm going to go to fellowship, or I'm going to go get another degree on top of what I have already. Once you unlocked that potential to earn money, I'm going to encourage you to take it, because as soon as you place yourself financially in a situation where you can control what debt that you pay, uh, it's so important, because the quicker that you start the process, the quicker it ends. And as soon as it ends, then you're in such a different financial situation than you were prior. When you have the opportunity for that job, you take it. And so for me, it was right out of residency. I did not go to fellowship. I stayed in a job where I that the earning potentials were very high, and then do it. So then now, whatever I decide next, I can do, because I don't owe anything to anyone.
100%. I love it. It's excellent. Excellent. Would you do it again if if you were to go back? What would you change?
If I were to go back, what I would have changed is my mindset after graduation. And I think for me at the time, when I watched that go from 215,000 to 3,000, when I speak numbers that I am currently speaking, that we paid off 340, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But I feel like the fear that I had after I watched that number grow and basically go by a third higher, um, I would have probably quit at that point if Kevin was not so persistent. I did not understand how I could borrow one amount of money, and then when I was doing what I was supposed to do, and going to residency and doing my training, then all of a sudden you turn around with a big number. So if I could do something differently, I would have gone after medical school and been able to say, either I'm going to change my approach on how to pay student loans in residency, or I'm going to just understand what that process is, because I almost quit after that and said, oh, okay, whatever, this is with me forever, just based on that different $85,000. And that sounds stupid now, because I can tell you I paid off 40 in 22 months. So what's 85? But at the point, that was the crushing blow for me. That was where I was like, okay, I'm done. Whatever. I'm going to be in debt for the rest of my life. And so if I could do different, it would be that transition.
Excellent. One last question. If you were given $340,000 in loans right now, if you were to go back to your old self, and they gave you two options for your school, for a house, what would you have done?
Oh, yeah, for school, for sure.
100%. Thank you.
I mean,
because the earning potential is amazing. And in your house, you're what? You're gonna grow some equity. What? Maybe double your equity within 30 years or something, or whatever the situation is. But this is a lifelong investment of education. Nobody can take that away from you. So you have to always put those things into perspective for our listeners. Make an investment that you own, an investment that always stays with you, an investment that gives you the potential and the ability to leverage. That is always best than to doing some fancy car, some fancy house. And once again, buy non-depreciating assets. I think our greatest asset, like a Grindle, is our education.
agreed 100%. It never gets old. My car will die. My house will have to be renovated. But my education gets better with time. They pay me more the older of a physician I am than the
And
younger.
100%, and the more experience. So overall, was it worth it?
Yes, I would say it's worth it. When you
100%.
afterwards, and when you've done it, and when you can tell other people how to do it, 100% worth it. But there was a couple times where I questioned my sanity. I'm sure you were with me during those times.
100%. I was there with you. But yeah, so it was 100% worth it. And I'm very, very thankful, Dr. Grindle, for sharing your experience with us. So enriching, so helpful. And I hope that our viewers will get a glimpse or even understand what you went through and begin to implement some of your strategies. You know, go do some personal research for yourself. Look into Dave Ramsey's processes. You don't need to follow everything to a T. Make it your own way and get out of that as much as you can. Thank you, Dr. Grindle. I hope you enjoyed this interview. I'm very grateful that Dr. Grindle was able to share her experience with us. But ultimately, the purpose of this interview is to educate you to invest in yourself. The biggest and the most important investment you can make as an individual is investing in your education, acquiring knowledge, acquiring skills to enhance yourself as an individual, to make yourself valuable. Student loans are not bad. These are great avenues for one to be able to use to acquire skills and knowledge that they would have otherwise not been able to achieve. Always consider your specific situation and circumstances and make the best choice for yourself. I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to share with your friends and family. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. Dr. Jima